Resource for Writers podcast, where each week you get mini craft talks from creative writing teachers and working writers. Head over to resourceforwriters.com, where you can join writing groups, classes, book clubs, and many other events. We hope you like this episode. Welcome to the Resource for Writers podcast. I'm Roxan McDonald, and I'm here with my co-host,
Desi Lenc.
And yay! And today we have our first ever guest, which is Andy Couturier, who was one of my first real writing teachers. So glad you're here, Andy.
Thank you. I'm super excited, and thanks a lot, Roxanne.
So to give you a little bio about Andy, Andy is a writing teacher who also is a writer. He has his books out, which are Writing Open the Mind, Tapping the Subconscious to Free Writing and the Writer, The Abundance of Less, Lessons in Simple Living from Rural Japan, and A Different Kind of Luxury, Japanese Lessons in Simple Living and Inner Abundance. So Andy, my friend, my teacher.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, so what we're doing today is we're going to talk about our history, because I think that it does speak to different ways of coming into writing, where we're comfortable, and then also about becoming a writing teacher. And the focus of this podcast is actually not just writers talking about writing or books. It's actually from the perspective of a writing teacher giving morsels of tips and encouragement and every week I get done with my classes, which I just did, and then I come to this and going, this is the thing that we mostly talked about this week. So it's for writers from writing teachers. So I want to talk specifically about you being a writing teacher, because you have done it for so long. So, but first, let's talk about how we met. And I want to hear it from your perspective, Andy, because
Andy, 25 years. Yeah. So what it was about 12 years ago. And I got this call, and I'm teaching in Berkeley. I'm about to drive down to Santa Cruz. And there's this person on the phone who is like, the very first thing he says, like, you're not going to make me crawl on the ground and bark like a dog, are you? Maybe I should pause there. What was your kind of like first thought on that?
Well, I think I saw a flyer of yours in Santa Cruz, and it was for a generative writers group, and it was all about writing from the subconscious. I'm not sure if that was the same name, but it was this experiential, we're going to get creative, all of that. And I was in a place where I'd taken a lot of creative writing in a community college, and I wanted to get back into writing, but I had just felt stuck. And I was running treatment program schools, and I was just brittle internally. And I had also just gone to California Institute of Integral Studies, which I call Woo Woo U, where they made us get on the ground and bark like a dog for college credits and stuff. And I was fed up. But I was also like, I need to get back to writing. So I called you. And then when you called me back and you said it's experiential, and I immediately was like, you're not going to make me get on the ground and bark like a dog. I'm not going to do it. And then Andy, I think the loveliness just gently coaxed in over the years. I still am not I'm not barking like a dog, but
today you can do it. You've graduated. How can you write from the perspective of a dog without enacting it? Okay, so the funny thing about this is I had already published Writing Open the Mind, which was based on my master's program, which was very straightforward and very it was on the teaching of writing, freshman composition, basically. Whereas all my friends had done MFA programs, which are very artsy, but this was sort of scientific and sociological. And I was also at the same time doing like Buddhist meditation, and improv theater and nature awareness and like just getting out into the real world. And I just gotten more and more into doing improv stuff and body-based stuff. And I was like, wow, this is a great way to source writing. And I was like, how radical can I get? And in my mind, literally that day, I was thinking we could just do some really crazy things. And I needed to like, I had like, this is a long time ago. I was like, I didn't ever have, my classes were like, oh, do we have enough people to run it? Maybe we have 4, we need a 5th person. It's not going to happen. I'm going to have to cancel it. And I get this call and I'm like, no, we're not going to bark like a dog. No, that won't happen in my class. Never. Come on in. You'll like it.
He's scribbling out the bark like a dog exercise in his curriculum. So then what happened is, what my experience was is that I showed up in your group and it was, writers group. We sat in a circle and then you gave us every week some weird ass thing, not barking like a dog, but something that was just it was non-linear. It was not about my story. I don't know if in that class you ever even asked us what we were working on. It was more like we had art, we had movement, we had all these. I mean, it's a lot of them are in your book, which I go back to a lot, the Writing Open the Mind book, where I mean, it's just this incredible dive into creativity and wildness. And then
that's what I wanted it to be. And I do feel like that's true. Yeah, I think that was a question. I don't know if you want to ask it as a question, but I can just go from there. So as I said, I was in this like stuffy program at San Francisco State, and they were teaching us, how to teach the paragraph and then the inductive paragraph and the reductive paragraph. And all of that was technical stuff, like different kinds of sentences. But at the same time, I had this wild side that really was interested in writing things that I didn't pre-think, that I didn't already know what I was going to write when I was starting to write. And that's the problem. And I never used like, okay, let me help you get rid of writer's block, because I even think giving it a name, it's writer's block, I have writer's block, is actually manifesting it and creating it. So I think actually better to see what is it that keeps us from being liberated, like really liberated in our writing, and how to unlock that, even if we don't know what it is that I'm already putting myself in a cage around. So over I think about 3 or 4 year period, primarily is when I developed a lot of these exercises. I just kept thinking there's got to be, just like different areas. Sometimes it was like the brain, right? Like how can we access different locations in our brain? So like a simple one, but it's a really easy thing. It's like a fragrance, right? Is to have like 4 or 5 different fragrances ready, and not only pleasant ones, maybe like, something that's a bit stinky, but also, like, I don't know, eucalyptus, which is really strong, or vinegar, or lavender, or some incense, and maybe a cigarette ashtray. I mean, I know that's sort of hard to come by these days, but it's actually really generative. And while you're writing on a topic, so I don't want to give people topics. I mean, I'm not against it, but I just feel like people are coming with things that they want to write about already. So there's lots of books of writing prompts, like write about, childhood home or grief, or, the first time you felt trapped or whatever. And there's a ton of that. It's just a great creative thing. But in terms of not blocking what people are already wanting to do, but also helping them get out of their own like self-generated or whatever society-generated rut that they learned from teachers who are well-meaning. We always just say that they're always trying to help. You got to figure out ways to get around it. So that particular exercise is, and it's just an easy one to envision, is you smell with your non-dominant hand, but you keep writing on your topic. And it turns out that you have access to different words themselves, but also different language patterns, different memories, because you're tapping into different locations in your brain. And a second part of that is say you have 5 fragrances and you have a 25-minute free write of 5 each. Could be 3 minutes each, or longer, depending on how much time you have. You have these chunks of writing that are associated with each other, but are not like logically flowing into the next one. And that, maybe I can talk about that later, comes from my study of macro structural organization for my master's thesis, i.e. how do you organize your novel? How do you organize your essay? How do you organize your nonfiction book in a way that feels organized, but at the same time is intuitive and open? And that is based believe it or not, on Japanese flower arranging and Japanese aesthetics, and putting together, so back to the smells, these different fragrances, these 5 chunks, is a kind of asymmetry of putting together 5 different chunks of writing that are not necessarily woven together with clear transitions, and have that dynamic break between each one that causes the reader to create or participate in the fertile process of creation themselves, instead of me, the writer, spoon feeding them every single predigested thought, which I think is actually less generous.
I like that too, because like their sense of smell is so tied to memory. So that seems like such a great exercise for writers.
Well, and I love that I wish I would have written it down, but it's like the fertile soil of creativity.
It was a fertile process of so instead of, look, what's generous writing, right? You want to be generous in your writing, and many people want to kind of just, give everything, right, and fill in all the chinks and just, but it can actually feel like force feeding so to actually invite them in to the process of creative meaning making by leaving gaps and spaces intentionally and having them make the links, and you're not in control of everything they do with it, which is actually kind of challenging for writers. Like, I want them to think the exact thought I thought. I want them to have the same idea that I had. I want them to have the same experience I had.
Mm-hmm. How do you work with that when something is confusing?
I want to answer that, but like, let's give an example, Roxanne. Like, when you say it is confusing, what do you mean? Like, I know that seems obvious, but if just like it is.
Well, I mean, it's funny because let's talk about this, because before we started recording, Andy and I were just going over what we were going to talk about, and we are so different. And Andy has informed so much of my teaching and writing style. But so much of this podcast specifically is me doing stuff that I can hear Andy just being like, no, like in the back of my head, don't do that to people, And so one of the things is complexity in prose. Complexity is really incredible. And confusion is your enemy, because we will lose readers when they are no longer they're no longer with you. They don't know where they are. They don't know where they are in time and space. They're not having the emotional experience that you intended because of not being able to follow the dots. And
okay.
And I do want to just bring up too, because I remember you showing me the flower arranging. What's it called again?
Ikebana.
Which is it does have, when you showed it to those arrangements, they have an emotional resonance. And even with this, it's not a normal arrangement. It's normal in our sense of Western, I guess, but there's an emotional, like each arrangement has an emotional response. So we are, as people witnessing those, having emotional responses. And so if you're talking about arranging writing in that way, I want to understand what you're talking about.
Okay. I'll go with the first part first and then the second part. And maybe I can share some images of flower arrangements that you could patch in later if you want to, because they are very beautiful and I was very moved by them. But let's start with this thing. It is confusing. So, and losing the reader. So it used to be, I read a lot of poetry, more and more. I spend a half an hour at least every day, maybe an hour and a half of poetry. And I used to like only poetry that I could get right away, that I could understand. It might have like a flourish or a touch or some kind of like a surprising turn, but I was following it the whole way. Sometimes, I think most of the time now, I find it a little, I'm just going to be radical. That's where I think you and I are really pretty similar. We're both radical writing teachers. And I find, I'm just going to say, I sometimes find, very simple, easy to read poetry a bit insulting to my intelligence. It's like, yeah, I get it. It's like, why even put line breaks in that? Like something that actually challenges me to try to put it together instead of me saying that's confusing. There's something in that relationship that pulls me in and makes me want to try to figure it out. So if we are in a world that is increasingly like people are reading news, people are like, you know, everything should be just like a fiber optic cable that you plug into your head and then it goes out to the New York Times and it goes right in, or whatever it is that you read, and you understand exactly what they mean, and you can skim over it really quickly, and you can, you know, grab the content, right? It's not even writing anymore, it's just content, and you head out, right? I got it, my thing, I have it, you know, sort of like in some ways kind of colonialist and imperialist, like I'm gonna get that information, I'm gonna take it with me, I'm gonna put it in the sack, and I'm gonna use it for me, right? Now that's a little bit, I'm being dramatic with that, but you say that you may lose some readers, and I always say to my students, like, you're going to, every time you get a little more experimental, every time you get a little weirder, there are going to be more conservative readers who will be like, I don't get this, or this is too difficult for me, or I don't like it. But you're also going to find that people are pulled in, other people, different people who like that, you know, challenge, who like to be invited in, and exactly where you turn that dial, exactly how weird and freaky you get, so that people are almost prevented from connecting the dots, right? You're still going to keep gathering readers who like really challenging work. There's a whole school of poetry called language poetry. And a lot of times it's just like, I have no idea what's happening, but there's a quality to it, or there's several different qualities to it. And I'm just excited and pulled in by that. I mean, and this is not new, right? Like, James Joyce, hard to follow, right? You know, T.S. Eliot, all this stuff back 100 years, people were writing things that took a little bit of energy and figuring out. And you, even after you like picked it apart with dental tools, you couldn't tell what was the writer trying to communicate to me. And to me, I find that's like the mystery of dawn, or the mystery of not knowing another person. Say you're going on a first date with them, there's like so much you don't know about them, and what do they mean by that, and you're pulled in by that. How to do that exactly, and exactly where you want to turn that dial, and how challenging or kind of easy to digest. That's the excitement of being an artist to me.
Mm-hmm. And so then with back to the flower arranging and structural writing, can you talk more about that?
So you are about to hold up the copy of The Abundance of Less. So since this is actually a asymmetrical piece of art in itself, right? So this is a cover of a marketed book in the world of capitalism, and I want people to buy the book, right? And there's empty space in there, right? There's sort of a grouping here of a bunch of things, and then like two other things here. The original title, actually, the original cover had like 4 or 5 more, and both me and my partner Cynthia were just like, no, we have to have less there so that people can feel like they can move in there themselves and start to arrange the meaning, the connection, and your eye, I think, moves around and it sort of makes different linkages. And so that's the idea behind it. The genesis, maybe this is an easy way to frame this. So we have the Roman numeral outline, like, you know, capital letter A, capital letter B, you know, small 1, small 2, you know, and we were learned that that's the way, you know, the 5-paragraph essay. You know, these are all very easy, and you can write great stuff inside of a 5-paragraph essay. Dogs are great because they're furry, funny, and cute. That's paragraph 1. Paragraph 2, furry. Paragraph 3, funny. Paragraph 4, cute. Tell them what you said. Dogs are great because they're furry, funny, and cute. I've proven that dogs are. So
I want to read that essay.
Right?
It's your assignment. You have to write that essay for next week. And we'll all compare. Let's definitely get into that whole compare and fear thing later, because I think that's a really important thing about feedback, where people don't get frozen. But back to the asymmetry and ikebana. So ikebana is Ikebana, and it's Japanese flower arranging. Okay, so we have on one hand the Roman numeral, you know, outline that we learned in 7th grade, and then we have stream of consciousness, right? The next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And when Freud was new, that was super exciting. Like, wow, we could actually write that way. I think there's there's only a certain amount I can read of that. It just feels like it's like a kid telling a story and just going on and on. We don't even actually know where it's going. So it doesn't really feel like there's a sense of structure, even though you do get a sense of that person's brain. Maybe it's just a limited length form. But what's in between those two? Can you create something that has a feeling of structure, feeling of intentionality, that at the same time doesn't feel like it's forcing you to be somebody that you don't want to be, or forcing you to just either take hook, line, and sinker what the person is presenting you, or resent or reject it because like you think they're, whatever, you disagree with them, right? So this is like, that's another kind of symmetry, right? I totally agree with you. You're great. Oh, that's total bullshit, right? So in some ways that's just sort of static. And if we just boil it down to 2 versus 3, there's just some dynamism. Things move around. So how do you do that in a piece of writing? So I shared with you guys the fragrances. So there's another one that is actually in the direction of barking dog on the floor, but not that. Don't worry.
I'm leaving.
It's okay. Calm down. I won't do that to you. But here's a writing exercise you could do. It's super simple, right? You're sort of stuck about where your plot's going to go, or you're feeling like you're just in a box canyon and you don't know, you feel like there's no way to get out, right? It's pretty, but you're just kind of like back and forth. If you were to start moving around the space that you're in faster and faster, and start like kicking, and just kind of bringing out and kicking and punching, or if you know some martial art or something like that, just really like express and bring that in your body, right? You'll actually, like fragrances, bring out, and then as soon as that energy is up in you, go and do 5 minutes of writing, like immediately on the topic, not about running around the room, not about kicking, but actually about, what are we going to do about, it could even be a very serious topic, right? Political situation in this country, Roe versus Wade, right? And you just kind of like, you're able to access that. I'm personally very infuriated today about that, as I have been for a while. Okay, so then I access those things, and then 5 minutes is up, stop the pen moving and get up and do a different kind of movement. So for example, if you know Qigong or Tai Chi, just a kind of gentle movement with your hands, and there's 100 videos on, if you've never heard of this, just some kind of like gentle movement that you're doing, and you build that energy up for a couple of minutes until something is happening on a different level. Then again, return to this and start writing. You're going to not only access different ideas, different memories, but you're going to also access word choice, and you're going to stumble. This is the important thing for me, stumbling upon something you didn't already know. I mean, you're not just a reporter reporting on the shit you already thought 20 times, right? You want to discover new things. Okay, then the third one is, say it's nighttime, or you don't, let's just assume it's nighttime. Turn off all the lights in your house. This is a little radical. And try to get from one side of your apartment or your house to the other as quickly as possible in the dark, or whatever, blindfold, right? So it's going to probably bring up some fear, right? I'm going to bump into some things, right?
Maybe a stubbed toe.
Maybe a stubbed toe, or maybe it's the worry about stubbed toe, right? Is that like, so for me, if I was writing about that topic, that might access this sense of fear about what's going to happen to me, what's going to happen to the future, what's going to happen to the world that I live in, what's going to happen with a whole bunch of kids born that aren't like being welcomed, being forced in by a law, like there's a sense of, I imagine, worry, and at the same time the mystery of the dark, like I really don't know. All of those things could come out. So say those are just 3 chunks of writing. So without me saying, the pre-digested ideas that I already have about abortion rights and autonomy and keep your laws off my body, which are great things, we need to be saying them, right? I'm actually exploring by juxtaposing those 3 different pieces together in a free write that allows people to make their own connections between those 3 different very human states that often are either ignored or at best kind of homogenized into one kind of main thrust or main thought on that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, and I think that being somebody who studied with you, I can say that those things absolutely work. Like that tweaking us out of this linear mind. And that even with my style now, where I do the workshop model, but I part of me wants to be like, Andy, come to one of my workshops. I want you to.
Not an actual invitation. Is that only part of you, or all of you? Because I'm coming if you're
okay. Because well, and I want to talk about the experience of a writer coming to the workshops, because I started with you with this, subconscious wild writing, generative workshop. And then I moved into your book completion group, which was, we come together for, I think it was 4 hours once a week, and sit together. And it was like body doubling, really worked for me. Other people in the room, we're all just there. And I felt like this thing where you would start off and it would just be like, we're all here to hold space for each other, to do this thing that's our heart's desire. And that feeling of just, if I stop writing, they're going to stop writing, and I'm not going to stop writing, is that feeling. And then we would get this one-on-one time with you, where you held, what I feel like happened for me is that you held me as a human being and honored my creative self in a ferociously generous and kind way. And that made it so I could come back to the creating with I felt like I had support. And so, and I want to say that, because even though you don't do the model of like, let's critique each other, which I don't use the word critique. I don't allow it in my workshops, because it's not what I don't think it's a kind word, right? I don't think it has the energy of what I would want in a workshop. But that idea that as we're making a thing, we are creative human beings first. And that needs to be nurtured. And then I also felt like you would challenge my ideas of like time management, my priorities. You would help me along the way, and which is more linear than I think people would think about this. You would challenge me about like, well, what are you choosing to do, and da da da, and I would make plans and these things, but it was all in that generous place of this artist self needs you to I don't want to use the word fight, but to just advocate for it. And I feel like that's when I think about you, Andy, it's whatever you're doing is that you're advocating for the creativity in all of us. And
thank you. That's exactly what I hope to do with my life. And that's what I've been doing. I mean, when someone said to me, a dear friend was like, you should teach writing. I didn't even think of it. And I was like, that will never get boring. That will always be interesting. And my day job, I love doing it. I love helping people. I love designing exercises because it's its own art form. But let's get to the critique thing for a little bit, because I think that's actually an important thing to unpack a little bit. Mm-hmm. Okay, so one of the reasons writing gets, let's use this word, dull or boring is because we are afraid of taking a risk, right? We're worried, what are people going to say? So when you're creating an environment, and I may even be doing a teacher training this year, later this year, I'm thinking about that as possibilities, is how do you create for other people as a form of, whether it's a spiritual practice for you or just your, innate generosity, how do you create an environment where they can absolutely be who they are, right? Society's always teaching people to do all kinds of bourgeois middle class things to just kind of fit into a square, which is why I always loved your perspective, because you didn't come from that, right? And that's not what you care about. But those things are actually literally feeling like pressing people down. There was moms apologizing for their kids. You see this all the time. I'm so sorry. Right? Everyone's in this constant anxiety, fear state. So when we bring that to the writing group, that's not to say that if I've got something I've worked my butt off on and I polished it, like my novel, I was talking to a friend and we were, I was trying to talk through every use of the word deranged, crazy, insane. And this is a person who's gone through a lot of mental illness stuff. So I definitely wanted to talk to him about every time that word got used and how it came off to him. So there's no problem with doing that. when I'm near the end of my process and I'm ready to send it to an agent or a publisher, or just get it out in the world, or share it in whatever way I want to share it. And there's a lot of radical ways to do that. But when that's the sort of like, what's the thing? It's like when you're a hammer, everything becomes a nail, right? Mm-hmm. When that's the only tool we have, and people, kind of come quivering to the group, and then someone says, that's cliche and that's awkward and it doesn't make sense. And it's even just a tiny shift. Instead of saying your writing doesn't make sense because I'm not, whatever, can't follow it, or I can't connect the dots, and I like connecting dots, or I don't like connecting dots. That's too obvious for me. It's always, when we come at it from that, you're actually triggering other people's fear response, right? And that makes them, when they go back to their writing, to have more hesitation, and probably use a more conservative word, or not take a risk. And frankly, that doesn't feel good, and most people stop writing because I talked to someone, and let me just use an example. Allen Ginsberg is somebody I love his writing. He's really wild, but years before I even taught writing, a friend of mine had taken a class from him, and he had torn her writing to shreds, and she stopped writing forever. And this is like a wild writer, Allen Ginsberg. So shutting people, and she remembered it for decades, what he said to her. Mm-hmm. One thing. So that's the rule, is like, unless someone specifically asks you, and then just to change from like, I couldn't follow this part and I wanted more of this, versus it was confusing, and why don't you, add another brother and take out that sister and use more concrete, specific details, and stop using so many adjectives and, active verbs, and all of these sort of like boilerplate things, which deny the complexity of the human brain and our relationship to the huge world. I mean, if you look at the size of our brain, it's like this big, and you look at the size of the planet, the idea that we could comprehend all the complexity, we've got to write in such a way that reflects that complexity and weirdness and inexplicable way. Otherwise, in some sense, it's a lie. So how do you create an environment in a writing group where people are giving feedback that excites the other writers to go back? And that's about welcoming emergent things, or half-finished or obscure things. And if the writer is like, I want this to be like super clear and absolutely nobody can confuse it, I can absolutely speak to that, and I can encourage the people in the group to speak to that. But just to assume that that's what it's sort of like monocropping, or or consumerism. It's just sort of like, go to Macy's for the Macy's sale. It's over in 12 hours, get your products and bring them home. It's that kind of, and it pisses me off. And it can be so much richer than that. It can be so much more heartfelt and connected, and people actually start writing better. So when writing teachers say, oh, I couldn't do anything with that person, they didn't have any talent. It's actually, everyone dreams in multicolors, and people are just incredible. They all have 100 billion brain cells, right? You just have to create an environment where, like a tropical terrarium, stuff will come up. It's not up to me to force the tomato to grow. Just create an environment. It'll happen.
Do you ever give like constructive feedback about craft? Is that a part of anything that you offer writers?
Yes. I mean, if I have to answer yes or no, yes. I
answer the question, Andy. Do you or do you not?
There's a phrase in Japanese, dochira ka to yuto, meaning if I have to say one or the other, I will say yes. So this book is actually about craftspeople, like handcrafts people woodblock carvers.
That's where I was holding it.
Yes. So craft is a beautiful thing. I think in some sense, it's a useful metaphor for writers and writing teachers. I think, like all metaphors, they become somewhat self-limiting when they become the only metaphor we use, because how do we really separate artistry from craft, or even, try to delineate that between the difference between that and just mystery, right? And the way that, like, you're talking about these Japanese flower arrangements that moved you emotionally. And I wish I had a boilerplate line. I could say, why does it move us emotionally? But it's kind of hard to pin that down. But it emerges in ways that we cannot predict. So if it's not predictable, it's not something that I can put my thumb on the scale and say, Roxanne, I think that scene about, your brother, the clown, it went on a little too long. And, if you made it shorter, it would be punchier. I mean, I could say that, but here's a simpler answer to this. I could say, if you were asking me, I would always have to have permission, just like I would have to have permission to go to an indigenous person's community or come into somebody's house. Like, do what kind, and someone would have to really sort of know that there's other options, right? Because they're like, just tell me what's wrong with it. People come to me all the time. Tell me what's wrong with it, how to fix it. And I wish it was that simple. I mean, you could write refrigerator repair manuals that way, but to write a piece of literature or fiction. But say you've given me permission to, that was a incredible piece. I've remembered, it was 12 years ago that you wrote about clowns and different clowns on the street. I could say, for someone like me who wants more, I give you an alternative, a false dualism maybe, but I'd say for someone like me who wants more like weirdness and like clowns and like strange shit happening, right? You could just turn up the hue, saturation, and volume on all of that. But if you're hoping that people are like kind of can accept clowns in society and not be afraid of them, and hoping to kind of bring them in, you might not want to start with such a like, vivid, intense kind of like confrontational image of this guy, shouting, right? But I'm not going to say that I think you should do that, because then we're all of a sudden doing writing by committee. And that's the big danger of critique, is that you, especially when you get a group, right? All of a sudden it's groupthink, right? And then people start to like parrot what the teacher says or what they got from their MFA program. And then you can see, oh, this is the Black Mountain School. Everyone writes like that, But really, the trick is to nourish this thing that's trying to happen out of the person. So you could say, I was moved by this particular thing. If you wanted to do more of it, here's a place where you could do more of it. But I resist I definitely think certain things are better and certain things are worse. I'm a normal human being. But if I try to do that, then I'm getting involved in, I don't know if you know this term in French, it's called auteur, and it basically means author, but it's used in French New Wave cinema, like basically over Jean-Luc Godard, he was on auteur, and the production, the actors, the script writers, none of those people could get in the way of Godard's vision, right? And you have a Fellini movie or Godard movie that really feels like that person's vision. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what we want with our writing, is that it comes, even if we don't know what it is. So creating the environment without trying to, just prune someone's tree to the topiary shape of the albatross that you want to have out in your yard. Or there's in the Basquiat movie, there's like a funny scene where this rich man's wife is like, asks Jean-Michel Basquiat, this great artist, like, do you think you could change the brown so it would like match our couch more?
Oh, wow.
It's an obvious example, but I think it's a very, very slippery slope and very tricky for writing teachers to not get into that, and to just really try to find where things are alive and where the writer is trying to go, even if they don't know. It's easy to be like, I think you should do this, but it's hard to be like, this is where I think this is trying to happen here. And if someone's using a whole lot of the same phrase again and again and again, I might try to point that out. Like, hey, you've used this phrase a lot. It has different number of effects. For some people, it might be this. And then I work really hard, even if I really think it's that, to be like, other people could really feel reassured by, meeting that same phrase again and again. It depends upon what you want to do with it. And then hopefully when they go home and they think about it, they'll make the choice for what they want it to be.